Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha with Ice Cream Fitness here, and once again it is time for the Gear Talk Q&A because there's enough interest in this and I did get a lot of questions this week. I'm going to go ahead and start this back up and try to do it maybe once a week. And just for my disclaimer, just in case anyone from YouTube is watching, I run a UK-based channel. Current laws in the United Kingdom state that use and possession for personal use of any of these anabolic substances that I'm discussing are legal and suffer no criminal penalty in the country where I live in and the country where my YouTube channel is hosted. So this is not discussion of illegal activity. But hold on, let me give you guys a bicep shot first. And let's get right into these questions. These first two questions are very similar, so I'm going to overlap the answers a little bit. But the first question, truth or myth? Burning out your receptors and blunting drug sensitivity. According to all of the research available, when you go to doses of anabolics or testosterone that put your testosterone levels above the normal range, over a period of time your receptor count increases. It does not decrease, they do not burn out. You actually seem to develop more receptors for these substances, which means over time you could use more and get more benefits from higher doses. So this receptor burning out has not been found to be true in research. And even though I know at least one other guy on YouTube has said so, Rich Piana has tried to say that, it's scientifically incorrect. It's not true. There are other reasons why people seem to get reduced gains the longer they stay on. First of all, over time, because you're producing more anabolic response in the body, certain catabolic hormones are going to rise a little bit and you're going to get a catabolic response. So eventually you might have to back off dose just to get those catabolic responses back down. But for people on relatively large amounts, like say IFBB pros, and most of them do not even cruise, they don't taper off, they don't come off, they stay on high doses, they don't necessarily have this problem. But for people at more moderate doses, you'll see that. But the other biggest point is that the bigger you get, just like when you're natural, the harder it is to gain more muscle. And it's the same when you're enhanced. The more muscle you have gained from the drugs, the harder it becomes to make additional gains without either increasing the dose, adding new drugs into the stack, and a host of other things, just because it is more difficult to grow and gain muscle the more muscle you already have, regardless of whether you're natural or enhanced. Those same issues still apply. Your body is resistant to add muscle beyond a certain threshold. So no, receptors do not burn out. This is complete myth. All the scientific literature seems to indicate that it's the exact opposite, that receptors upregulate, they don't downregulate with prolonged use. All right, next question. When you're on all year round, how can I know when I have to change steroids that I'm using? Because I hear a lot about the body's getting used to the same steroids. Is that true? No, that's not true. That also goes back to some of the stuff you've seen Rich say. And there's kind of a battle on this on YouTube. There are a couple of schools of thought here, because I've seen 4 channels basically discuss this stuff in depth. You've got Rick Dresden, who did his interview with Rich Piana, and then you have Jerry Ward, who's a friend of mine, on Bios 3 Training. They both said they believe in cycling, they believe in this concept. And then you've got me and you've got Mark Lodweiner, who say that when you go on, you stay on. You don't come off ever. This is a lifetime commitment. So you've got a couple schools of thought there. And if you go to forums like GH15, they'll tell you the same thing. We're telling you, you'll find other steroid forums. The cycling theory was born, basically, I think it was pretty much born on the internet, on forums. But when you get into hardcore circles, most people who really do their gear seriously, they don't really cycle off. They cruise or bridge between blasts. So it's blasting and cruising, and that's the theory that Mark and I support. And I think cycle theory is quackery. And I think it causes more harm than it does good, both in terms of health, your gains, psychology. But let's discuss this issue of changing drugs. What you need to remember is that you're using the same receptors. They don't become desensitized or used to a given drug. If you produce the same anabolic response from one drug and you change to another drug in an equal dosage versus anabolic activity, you're not going to make any different gains. It's not going to matter. Now, there are non-androgen receptor mediated anabolic responses in the body, but not all drugs produce them, and they're through different pathways. But interestingly enough, most people are going to run a test base year-round, at least a low dose of test, if not a high dose of test year-round, who are staying on year-round. And testosterone actually has non-androgen receptor mediated anabolic responses, while things like nandrolone have a much stronger affinity for the androgen receptor in muscle tissue, but they don't produce muscle gains through other pathways, such as elevating certain other anabolic hormones like testosterone does. So it can get complicated there, but you don't need to change drugs to keep making gains. You can use the same hormones and still continue to make continual progress. You don't need to change them ever. Now you can add different ones in or take certain ones out because you want different characteristics. Because obviously what guys are using who are stepping on stage ripped and striated and dry, or for a photo modeling shoot, is not going to be the same compounds you're using always to bulk on, and not going to be the same compounds that a power lifter is using in meets. There's going to be some variation based upon your goals and the characteristics and even the look that you want. But you don't need to change them to make gains. In fact, if your only goal is to get gains, you could just run testosterone year-round, 365, and stay on just test only and use ancillaries. If that's your only concern, it's just making gains.